Black women are one of the most religious groups of people in America, and much of what informs our romantic relationships are our shared faith traditions. Lately, though, it seems many of us are reevaluating the relationship we have to our faith and to ourselves, which is leading us to move a lot differently in our romantic relationships. The main question at hand for many Black women is, how do I truly thrive in love without the self-sacrifice and the self-sabotage? Our friend, resident love doctor, and celebrity dating and relationship expert, Dr. Aesha Adams-Roberts, returns to the show to help us answer these questions during this juicy and very empowering conversation that's all about love from a Black woman's perspective. Dr. Aesha is one of the top dating and relationship experts for successful women, and she has masterfully coached celebrities, professional athletes, and powerhouse professionals to delete their dating apps. She empowers women with tools to navigate the modern world of online dating, swiping, texting, and ghosting so they can create healthy, sustainable relationships. So if you want to hear from a love doctor who centers Black women's perspectives and experiences, then you'll certainly want to continue tuning in. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Aesha Adams-Roberts. Welcome to the show, Dr. Aesha. So we have a lot to discuss today, but before we get into it, I want to encourage those of you who are watching or listening right now to share this with someone who needs to hear it. This is going to be an amazing conversation. Just from the brief conversation that Dr. Aesha and I have had off air, I just know you're going to get so much out of it. And also, while you're watching or listening, I want you to sound off. I want you to sound off and tell me what you think of this conversation by texting me at 404-737-4957. Now, there's no special word or phrase to text because it'll really be me responding directly to you because I love hearing and seeing your reactions and can't wait to know what you think. So again, if you're watching this and you want to just tell me what you think, go ahead and text me at 404-737-4957. All right. Now, Dr. Aesha.
Yes.
Let's get into it. Now, you're a friend of the show, and we haven't seen you since the beginning of this pandemic. So first, I want to ask, how are you faring in all of this?
I am doing well. It's been a roller coaster in many ways, ups and downs, but just really, find a way to anchor myself in what I know for sure, to quote Oprah, and making through. And also discovering that there were people around the world, London, Africa, even men started reaching out to me, desiring help with relationships, because they came to an awareness during, quarantine and lockdown that they didn't want to do life by themselves. So I've been busy helping people.
That's awesome. So for the uninitiated, for those who may not know who you are, can you take a moment to share your larger mission and the purpose behind the work that you do?
Yes. So I am Dr. Aesha, also known as the Love Doctor. And what I really help people understand is the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships so that they can get ready to receive their mate when they show up, right? And that they can delete their dating apps if you're doing online dating because you finally met the right one and you can make it last, build a legacy. So I'm excited about that mission because, it allows me to disrupt a lot of the narratives and a lot of the status quo from the things that people are reading, the IG memes they're looking at, the stuff they hear on pulpit, their friends, their family, their group chats, right? And begin to teach them the art and science of dating and relationships. So in a nutshell, that's what I do.
And we love it. We love it. And you always drop some amazing gems and you cause us to think differently about things that we think we already know about relationships. So studies show that Black women are among the most religious groups of people in America. So the news about John Gray has a lot of us talking about how the standards for men and women in the church they seem to be radically different, and it's causing many to question the future of their involvement in the church, because this is not the first time that John Gray's antics or infidelity has been made public. And I'm always looking forward to your perspective on situations like these. And in the recent post that you shared, I believe it was on Facebook, you talked about how John Gray was your pastor, not literally, but meaning you went to a church where the pastor did some of the exact same things that he did multiple times. Why do you believe it's so hard for churches and parishioners to hold church leaders accountable, even though Black women make up the majority of these congregations?
Woo, you started off with the big one, Courtney. With the big one.
Let's get into it.
One of the biggest reasons why I think is the way that the church deals with sex and sexuality, and the silence of certain aspects of sex and sexuality, and the shame that really shrouds the way we talk about sex, women's bodies, women's place in the church, where it can create a setting where things can be done in the dark. If we were to quote our mamas and grandmamas, what's done in the dark comes to the light. And so that's why all of a sudden it seems like a scandal, right? Because people have been kind of forced in a lot of ways to deal with their desires in the dark, because certain things are not acceptable, right? And so that they then have to try to embody the story that gets put forth from the pulpit. So, for example, I remember when John Gray was just a comedian who would go around to churches, singles ministries would bring him in for their events. I was at one of those, I remember. And, he would tell all these jokes and stuff. And most of the time they were self-deprecating, talking about himself, talking about his weight, talking about the fact that he was still a virgin. That was his story at the time. And he was always talking about how he just couldn't wait to get this wife so that he could just do what he wanted to do in the bedroom. Like, that was always part of the spiel. Right?
I did not know that.
Yes, ma'am. That's how I remember him. So I was shocked once he was like a pastor and stuff. I'm like, wait, he was just the funny dude, that they brought in. Yep. So it was a part of his story. I am a virgin and I'm 32, or like whatever his age was. And my mama told me to keep myself, and I made a vow to her at the age of 13 or whatever it was that I would. So that was his story. It was a story he embodied, and that allowed him to make waves, right? He got the book, he got the Oprah Winfrey Network show. He suddenly gets the beautiful wife, the children, which is in many ways for our churches is validating. Like, in order to be a pastor, right, you got to kind of have that first lady. She got to have a certain look. So he was able to, in many ways show that he believed those things, that he valued those things. But obviously, Brother Deacon Pastor Bishop John Gray got some other desires.
Right.
He's got desires. Now, let me talk about his wife, Aventer, because from the things that I've seen her say and do, it is apparent that she was raised in a similar culture around purity, around, your desires need to be God's way, which means you, as I was told, you can't be dangling from any chandeliers. Mm-hmm. No dangling from the chandeliers, no certain positions, no oral sex, right?
Definitely not talk about no whop, right?
And so in many ways, sexual pleasure was really for men in that type of story. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you look at the things that he complained about to his side pieces, his mistresses, that she doesn't do, she don't suck, she don't cook, she don't do these things. They have the picture perfect. We have followed God's way to do this. But the reality is, right, that in many ways, both of them are repressed sexually. And so that stuff, gets hidden in shame. And then when that happens, when we have to do things in secret and in shame, we will make choices that will allow us to feel ashamed. That's just my perspective. So he keeps doing things where he's going to be found out, but there's screenshots so that he can feel ashamed because his desires are attached to shame. So that's
Mm.
kind of my like why these things keep happening. Um, because we're just not honest about sex and our bodies and our desires.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned how repression is a big theme for a lot
Yes.
of black churched women. And so you also mentioned in your post that you were sexually harassed in your
Yeah.
church, right? And I don't
Hmm.
think a lot of people understand how often this happens. And so it's really disturbing to know that you're supposed to be in this safe space, right? You're supposed to be coming and bringing your burdens and fellowshipping and getting closer to the divine, but at the same time there are some women who literally do not feel safe in the church,
Hmm.
not only as a result of sexual harassment, but as a result of some of the rhetoric that comes across the pulpit. So, can you talk about that a little bit and why, so many of us feel unsafe and some of us are actually leaving the church?
Yes. By the droves, right? Seeking safer communities. And I think in some ways, for for me particularly why I left that church was there was no accountability, right? There was no way to hold that man accountable. In fact, the pastor told me, well, I consulted with my spiritual father and he told me this man is too valuable, to let go of. And I remember thinking, so you're saying I'm not valuable? Like I give of my time, my treasure, my talent. I'm doing a lot of the labor in this work. And you telling me, that you can't even just sit this man down. So in many ways, that was the last straw of like, this isn't safe because there isn't even accountability here. But to your question about, why it doesn't feel safe, not just, if I walk into an environment, but the rhetoric, one of the biggest, I would say, sexual stereotypes that happen in the church is the Jezebel. I don't know,
Yeah, yeah.
think of your grandmama and your mama and, the legacy of our beliefs around that. The denomination I grew up in, and the Kojic Church of God in Christ,
I grew up
you
Kojic too,
know,
child.
girl,
We here with it. I get
you
it.
born in, you can't join in, right? So
That's it.
the grand old church. That image is something, that stereotype is something that they are very adamant about kind of squashing out and identifying. So it could be anything from wearing red, and here I got this red hair now, red lipsticks, wearing, makeup. Even I remember Courtney when I sang on the praise team at one particular church, they sat me down because I had sleeves that were too short, and they said if men saw my armpits, it would make them think of my vagina.
Wait, whoa, what?
Yes,
That's a leap. That's a stretch.
isn't it? But there's a lot of policing and controlling of women's bodies, right? So like, don't be shapely, don't show nothing, be holy, wear your skirts here, don't show your armpits. Instead of dealing directly with the men who somehow got a under armpit fetish or something. I don't know.
Right.
Like what kind of look at my armpit and think of that.
Right. And then, to your earlier point about shame and repression, a lot of these rules that come down or that we're sort of accustomed to in these faith spaces create shame in a lot of women, right?
Yeah.
Because, I didn't I was a late bloomer, but I remember having friends in church who, started developing as young teen girls, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? And so we're constantly told from a lot of faith leaders in faith spaces that our bodies are inherently sinful, and that by being in our bodies,
Hmm.
that we are a stumbling block to our
Yeah.
brothers in the church, right?
Yes.
So now that that's out there, and I'm sure that a lot of women who are watching or listening to this can relate to some of these dogmatic principles. How do you see Black women really coming up against those things and resisting them, beyond, leaving the church? What about those who are called to the church? What do you see happening right now?
I see a lot of conversations. I see a lot of people asking questions and questioning things, particularly my clients. Many of them are drawn to me because I start preaching and teaching a more liberating space, for example, around the whole concept of celibacy, which maybe we could talk about later, about their approach to why they believe they need to be celibate in order to get a husband, in order, to be considered worthy for God to give them one. And I give them a different perspective on that. So then they go back to the singles ministries and the first ladies and they start asking questions, right? And I also see pockets of resistance in many ways, and I wouldn't say pockets, I would say movements of resistance from womanist theologians. Womanist theologians are, people who believe that in order for us to even talk about our understanding of God, we got to center Black women's experiences and our history. So we got to do it through the eyes of a sister, right? And once we do that, things will change. And so I see people doing that. I see them doing different readings of scripture from the perspective of women, right? So instead of, say, looking at the woman caught in adultery, right, from the perspective of Jesus came in and stopped them, they'll look at the woman, like what was that experience like for her, so that we can preach a more liberating gospel, a more encompassing gospel. So I see people starting ministries inside of their churches, asking questions. And then, I mean, I've even had conversations with first ladies who have said to me, they believe something different than what is getting preached across the pulpit, but they
Oh,
feel like,
now I
yeah,
got I gotta I don't mean to interrupt you, but I gotta cut in here, Dr. Aesha. We're gonna get right back into this incredible conversation, but first, I want to take a quick moment to share something. Now, if you're watching this or you're listening to this discussion right now, then I have a sneaky suspicion that you're really interested in becoming a thought leader in your industry. A thought leader is someone who is considered an expert among the experts and is the trusted go to in their industry. They also move and inspire and disrupt people with their innovative messages, ideas, and actions. Here's the truth: the vast vision that you have requires you to be regarded as more than just a subject matter expert and more than just a popular influencer. It requires you to be respected as a thought leader. And in times like these, when people all over the world, both online and offline, are searching for someone or something to trust to guide them toward their end goals, it's so necessary to position yourself in this way. Now, this show is all about diving deep into the minds of brilliant Black thought leaders to learn how they think and to learn what they think. But I don't just want to stop at helping you think like a thought leader. I want to help you communicate like one too. Why? Well, because after 15 years of being a communication strategist and as someone who has worked with some of the most well known brands, well respected organizations, and highly regarded thought leaders, I know that the amount of money, the clients, customers, and opportunities that you really want all depend on your ability to clearly communicate the value of your brand, the value of what you have to offer, and the value of your work. So, if you know that you were made for more, and you're ready to claim it, you first have to speak it so that more doors can open for you. And I want to help accelerate that process for you. That's why I created the Thought Leader Assessment. It's a no charge assessment designed to offer you three key things. Number one, it'll reveal the kind of thought leadership characteristics you most likely embody already. Number two, it'll match you with an iconic thought leader so you can have a real world example to look to. And finally, it'll offer you 9 thought provoking questions every emerging thought leader needs to ask and answer in order to increase your influence, scale your impact, and raise your revenue. Again, this thought leader assessment is completely free of charge to you. So, are you ready to discover what kind of thought leader you are? To take the free thought leader assessment, go ahead and text the word quiz to my number at 404-737-4957. Again, text the word quiz to my number at 404-737-4957. And yep, it's me. I'm going to be responding with a link so that you can go ahead and take the assessment, get your results immediately, and start positioning yourself and your brand for more incredible opportunities. All right, now back to the show. So how do you see these women really negotiating the dissonance that they feel cognitively between what's preached and what they actually believe?
Yeah. I think it still speaks to some of the things that people do in secret, right? So they'll do certain things in secret. So like that conversation was done in secret over lunch, right? When the first lady told me that. And she was like, I can't really preach that, over the pulpit. And it had to do with marriage and women leaving abusive marriages and all of that. And I was like, but you need to. Like you need to, because there are women who are staying because they're looking to you as an example, right? And they're believing, well, okay, well, just supposed to pray my way through this. So I still see it happening in secret where they're pulling women aside. That happened to me in several churches where the first lady came in and said, I'm so sorry about what happened. Um, and for this particular one, I had sex with a gentleman, a church player. I won't even
Not a
call
church
him a
player.
gentleman. Church player, right? And because of the way that things were taught there, I felt I needed to confess this, to the elder and his wife, who are my accountability partners. They went without my permission and told the pastor, who then told the entire elders board, right, about a moment that was supposed to be intimate. Yeah.
Dr.
And
Aesha, they
so,
spilled your tea?
girl,
They spilled your
I
tea.
was They did. They did. And I had a
Wow.
friend who was the administrative assistant who called me and told me that it was the agenda for the meeting, the elders meeting. But when I tell you, I understand the layers and the craziness around sex and things in the church. I've lived it firsthand. So the first lady came to me and apologized because I left eventually. And she was like, I'm sorry. She was like, my husband consulted non-black people. Black people are different. You do what you got to do. Right. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but she did not do that in the church. Had she done that or created a space across the podium, my experience would have been different. The harm that I experienced would have been different, right? There would have been a balm there. I wouldn't have left feeling that I was ashamed and defiled, right, for the rest of
Right.
my life.
Right. Now, I'm really glad that you shared that experience because I'm sure you're not the only person who has gone through that. But that brings me to this next question, though, about women who do the work of policing, right? And they sort of double down on those respectability politics, that religious theology or dogma that often keeps a lot of women repressed and ashamed and feeling guilty. So it's still, to me, I don't understand how you can participate in your own oppression. I mean, I get it intellectually, I just don't get it emotionally. So because when we bringing it back to John Gray, right, the first time that this became public, I don't know how many years ago it was. Maybe it was a few years ago. A venter came out swinging, right?
Yes.
She was talking about this strange woman and talking just real. She said some stuff with her chest. And so we often see women sort of defending this inappropriate behavior. So, how can we come to a more liberating sort of experience in faith spaces when we have so many of us, doing the work of the patriarchy, right?
Yeah. I think in many ways, I mean, when I think about a Venter, and I had an exchange with her in comments, this was well before any of this happened. And I think I was speaking about, excuse me, his conversation about the spirit of girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And that, some of you aren't a wife because you have the spirit of girlfriend. And I wrote a blog post about it, that kind of, made splashes. Sister girl came into the comments. I don't even know how she saw it. And we had this exchange, and I had to tell her, yo, like, I'm not attacking you or your husband, So she has always been that type of defender. And I think in some ways it's because you have to stay in a place of the cognitive dissonance. Like I say, you got to tell a story to make it make sense. Because if you start to tell yourself the truth, if she told herself the truth, the total and complete truth about it all, what would that mean for her and her life? That she committed to a life, not just to a man, she committed to a life and a lifestyle. Now she's got children, right? Now she has to face the public in a way, to say, oh my gosh, this whole thing has been a lie. And so I think in some ways, women double down because, one, that's super painful, but two, there is a reward. There's a reward.
And what is the reward?
What she get? What did sister girl get?
Didn't she get a Lamborghini?
Yes, sister girl got a Lamborghini. Sister girl got a house, right? And sister girl gets the public, approval. That's what happened with the pastor who I said was similar to John Gray. Similar thing. She hung in there because she was like, look, you need to stay in the pulpit, she told him. And they ended up being placed at a mega church, taking over that church. So for some people, that is enough of a reward. You get the first lady parking spot. You know what I'm saying? You get the first lady position, like whatever that is. So some people hold on to that reward so tightly because, to tell the truth, compared to what the truth is, that reward feels pretty good. So I've heard a lot of people, Reva Timms, I don't know if you remember Zachary Timms. Do you remember him at all, Courtney?
I remember him. I remember hearing his name before. Yeah.
He passed away several years ago to a drug overdose. He also was caught in infidelity. And his wife has written a book. And she said that people, or his, ex-wife, that major ministry leaders came to her and said, listen, you might not be the only lady, but you're still the first lady. Get the house, get the designer clothes and stuff, and just accept this. So there is a culture, right? And this was other women telling her this.
Wow. Other
powerful first ladies. So there is this expectation that you get to exchange all of that, trade it in for a Lambo.
Yeah.
And, Reva wasn't accepting that. She's like, that's not what I want. And they ended up firing her, kicking her out of her own church. So, like, you see the punishment that comes when you start to tell the truth, or, the fears that once you start telling the truth, you're going to expose it all. So people kind of cling on to that, to give them a little piece of, reward for obeying.
And this is some really great insight here, and this is why I love having conversations like these on the show, because it is often more nuanced and more layered than a lot of the conversations we often see online. People are very quick to sound off and to talk about what they would do and what she should do and what he should do, but oftentimes those decisions that you have to make do come with a lot of weight, and they come with a lot of responsibility. And so it's not as easy to just say, well, she should leave. There's a lot of stuff going on there, right? So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. So I want to turn our attention to something else that has really been in the news as of late. And the reason why this conversation is so relevant is because who we partner with as women and as people in general is one of the most life defining decisions that we can make. Now, I know that Sheryl Sandberg got a lot of flack for how her book Lean In failed to really examine or bring in some of that intersectionality, the intersectional identities of women, especially Black women and other women of color. But one thing that she did say resonated with me, and it's still stuck with me. I read this book even before I got married, and she made this assertion that who you marry or partner with is one of the most important career and business decisions that you can make. So I want to talk about Cardi B, who recently announced that she's filing for divorce from her husband of 3 years, Offset, because the news nearly broke the internet the other day as a trending topic, and I saw that you wrote about it as well. So many people are weighing in on this. Some are praising Cardi for her decision. Others are criticizing her because to them this move is inconsistent with her recent chart topper with Megan Thee Stallion, WAP. So Dr. Aesha,
Mhm.
uh,
Yes.
you what is your take on all of this?
I mean, the most ridiculous, I'm just going to call it ridiculous because, yes, I'm judging you, okay? Yes, I'm sitting in a seat of judgment in this moment. The most ridiculous things I've been seeing is, people connecting WAP and her WAP must not be good enough, for him. And that's why this marriage has dissolved. Or, oh, that line in the song where she said, I don't cook and I don't clean, but let me tell you how I got this ring. Well, she should have been cooking and cleaning, to
And I have a
keep him
story
like,
for that. I have a story for that actually. Um,
yes.
so I posted something about this entire controversy, and it had, of course, the response. Someone had written something that I shared that went viral, and I'm just going to share it with you all right now. So you should see this come up on the screen. Um, so someone wrote, seeing some men's response to Cardi B filing for divorce from Offset is why I say men aren't a prize. If a woman chooses to stay in a marriage where she's getting cheated on, y'all talk about her. If a woman chooses to leave a marriage where she's getting cheated on, y'all talk about her. Like I always say, nothing brings a lot of men together than an opportunity to prove they don't like women, they just like having sex with him. Now, I didn't write this. This was something that someone else wrote that I shared. And I shared it on my personal Facebook page. And I got quite a few responses. And in one of those responses, someone, a male, and we're gonna protect his name. Um,
Yes.
he says, as you can see here on the screen, but if you're listening, I'll read it to you. No man wants his WAP out on display for the world to see, especially if they don't cook or clean. He cheated in peace. And there were some laughing emojis and a shrug emoji. And so after a little bit of an exchange between he and I, he said, hey, I'm just being honest. A majority of men think that way, whether you believe it or not. Honesty is the best policy. So, Dr. Aesha, now, he's making the assertion that the majority of
Yes.
men feel this way. And I responded to him. I said, listen, that might be your truth and your perspective, but I surely hope that you don't speak for the majority of men. So it's really interesting that when conversations like these occur, we see a lot of men chiming in, and they're very vocal about how they feel about all of this, similar to this person on my Facebook page.
Mhm.
And they add to the conversation, they add their 2 cents. But at the same time, they also show some of their problematic mentality. So, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I can. Because the first thing that pops out about his response of, no man wants his WAP. So let's just stop there because the WAP is not yours, bro. The WAP is on the woman's body, sir. The this is something that we have to disrupt, right? Especially inside of churches and even in just, black relationship industry stuff that comes out. Women's sexuality is for us. It's for us. It's for us. It's our pleasure. It's our bodies. It is not his WAP. He doesn't own it, right? And so that first statement is very problematic. No man wants his WAP being shown. Well, it's not yours, sir. And I think a lot of our relationships, we've been told that that's the structure of the relationship, right? Like people will use the scripture that your body is not yours, it belongs to him, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I've seen theologies that have said, well, whenever a man wants sex, when you're married, you cannot deny him because that's not your body, it is his. Sir, no. No, sir.
That's
Right?
really
So,
disturbing because it's especially because the laws have, I mean, up until recently there have been laws that said that women have no right to file criminal charges against their husbands for rape, because
yes,
for the longest time it did not exist. Marital rape did
right.
not exist in the eyes of the law. So that is really something that we have to talk about and dispel.
Yeah, and I think for me, a lot of what was problematic about seeing some of the men talking about this, I was like, this is rape culture. It might not be talking about rapes, but this is the culture that permits it, right? That men feel like they own it and that they can have access to it and that it's theirs, right? And they can control it and how it's dressed and all those things, right? So like that's the first thing that makes me a little ticked off about that conversation, and him asserting that most men feel this way, because you can't love and control somebody at the same time. You just can't. You're not loving them if you're trying to control them, because control is rooted in fear, and there is no fear in love if we need to go to the scripture. All right, so
Right.
that's the first. The other thing is, as we were talking, in the virtual green room, is that it feels like a lot of men speak up on issues of women and sexuality and whether or not they choose to leave the relationship, which I think is what is triggering some of these gentlemen, is that Cardi filed, that she left, that she said she wasn't going to do this. And that kind of, triggers men. It scares them, I think, in many ways, that women will choose themselves and they will leave. And they'll say, put it on Facebook, that they left. So, and Cardi in many ways is a powerful woman. She doesn't need his money, like, so she can start over easily. So that's triggering. But this idea that men come out to talk about this, when we as women, Black women, have been hashtagging it up saying, please protect Black women. Like, do you show up for the protests for Breonna Taylor? Like, we have the hashtag say her name, where literally on one of my posts about this, a woman responded to a gentleman who, was trolling my page, and she wrote a paragraph saying, listen, all we're asking is for Black men to speak up for us and to point out, Offset, if he's cheating, that's trash. And man, you shouldn't cheat on your woman. And with Meg the Stallion, getting shot, right? Dudes,
Yeah.
that's violence. Don't do that, right? We're looking for that voice, and instead, what we're getting is, well, don't no man want his whop out in the street, right? What we're getting is justification for violence, emotional abuse, and things like that. And so, what we're looking for, what I said is, in order for us to clear space for another conversation, one, we have to stop dehumanizing women and making women objects, right? And number two, we've got to start requiring that men see themselves beyond their own sexual conquests and their prowess, right? And the size of that vitamin D, like, or their eggplant, or whatever you want to call it. Like, we need
Yes.
men to show up in ways that meet our relational needs, not just romantically, but you're supposed to be my brother, right? You're supposed to be in this community with me. How are you meeting our needs? Because as Black women, we do so much of the emotional labor in our relationships. So to me, that's the bigger context for why this brother would pop up on your page and you ain't never seen him before. And he got something to say.
Right, exactly. So, you mentioned emotional labor in relationships. For those who may not understand what that is exactly, can you define what emotional labor is and what it looks like?
Yeah. So the gentleman who showed up on my post about Cardi B, his very first statement was, "Women were created to be the helpmeet to men." Like, that was his first statement about the Cardi B Offset thing. And so for church women, when we hear that and we're taught that that's your role as a woman, as a wife in a relationship, to be a helpmeet, well, that looks like the cooking and the cleaning, right? It also looks like supporting him and whatever goals and missions that he has. It also means praying for him and encouraging him when he's got issues that maybe he should take to the therapist, like his anger issues or his lack of self control, his infidelity, like whatever those personal growth things, spiritual character growth things that he has intended to. We supposed to do that work. And, if you've got a family, you also have to step in to fill those gaps. if he's not doing that. So we do a lot of that emotional labor. Our minds are always thinking about the relationship. We're always thinking about family. We make our decisions, and this has been shown in studies that women will make choices in their career based on how it will affect their relationships. More than men, men aren't even really taught to think about it, right? Like they don't have to think about it; they make the decision. So doing the emotional labor, I think, for so many women is what makes it feel like relationships are so much hard work and I don't want to do it because you're taking on his stuff um, in addition to your own. One of the analogies that I give women is like when you travel and you go down to the baggage claim and you hear that voice on the loudspeaker that says, check your bags because some of them look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us are carrying bags in relationships that look like ours, but it's actually the other person's. So you need to check the bag
Wow,
and
that's good.
drop it. Don't even open up the baggage and sort through it. It ain't yours. Just let it go. That's what emotional labor is.
That's really, really good. Now, Dr. Aesha, um, anytime the viewers hear that you're going to be on the show, they come with the questions. So we have a few viewer questions related to this, and someone asks. I'm going to put it here on the screen. Someone asks, what warning signs or questions should Black women be on the lookout for, or questions should we ask initially to ascertain if someone is going to waste our time? And I think this is an apropos question because, we're seeing a Cardi B, filing for divorce, where of course we just talked about John Gray, and there's just so many other instances where I'm sure some of your clients come and say, listen, now I'm not trying to waste my time. So what do you say to those women?
Yes, because the last thing a sister needs to do is waste her time, right?
We need to
And I
reclaim
know
it
this
if nothing else.
okay. And I also say that not only do you need to protect your time, you need to protect your energy, your emotion, emotional space when it comes to dating and relationships, because that is another way that it costs us our time having to get over it, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
spend months and years trying to get over stuff. So one of the big mistakes that I see people making is waiting too late to ask about the other person's intention for why they're doing relationships. So they'll be like, well, I've been dating him for 6 months, and I'm just trying to figure out where things are going. Or it's been 5 years sometimes. And I say to them, okay, would you get on an airplane, get up to 50,000 feet, and then be like, where is this going? It's already going somewhere. It's going to Timbuktu, sis. Like you didn't check your ticket. So you have to have conversations early on. And when I say early, I'm talking about on day one.
Oh
But
wow.
it's not it's not a conversation of, okay, what are we doing? It's more of a conversation getting his thoughts about relationships, about marriage, about women even. And to be, to give men credit, sometimes they're just not sure yet. And they don't want to come out and say it because then you think, y'all booed up based off of what he said. But you need to ask, so what do you see for yourself when it comes to relationships? Is a different kind of question, right? Where most people are like, what are your goals? Or what do you want? What do you see for yourself? That's an important question because it speaks to vision. If he has no vision for what he sees for himself, why he's on, BLK dating app, if he has no vision for what he sees for himself in a year from now, that is a big clue that he's going to wander and he's going to take you with him, right? And
Huge
then you're going
warning
to,
sign.
yeah, that's wasting your time. So you want to know that. You also want to know, another good question is, what did you dislike the most about women in your past relationships? Because you want to know how he feels about women in general, right? So if he starts bashing, he starts doing stuff, that energy, I don't know if we should connect, right? Here's another question. What did you learn about yourself from your last relationship? Because we want to see, does brother man have awareness and does he do personal growth? Because if he don't, and even if he wants to commit to you, that type of relationship is going to be a challenge. So you want to ask more global questions beyond like, do you want to get married and have kids? Because some men will say yes, because they know
Mm-hmm.
that's what you want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to get more inside of his character with the questions you ask.
Now, another viewer asks, as Black women, should we create a list of non-negotiables either for ourselves and or share them with partners we're interested in?
It's a good question. I say this that standards are for you to live by. Boundaries are how you tell other people how to relate to you. So you live your standards, you communicate your boundaries. So in these non-negotiables, then the way that you would communicate that in the beginning is through your boundaries. Those things can be, what you're willing to do, what you're committed to in your life, so that you don't, these are decisions I've made for myself, right? A lot of people think the standards are trying to control other people's behavior, and you can't do that. So you should have that clearly for you. And then once you have your conversation about relationships, which most people don't do, they just fall into it, right? We together. You want to have a relationship agreement type of conversation. What are we agreeing to? How we're going to meet each other's needs? What are our non-negotiables? How do we handle conflict? Like all of that needs to be upfront, right? Because you're making an agreement with each other when you make a commitment. So don't make a list and read it to him. You need to have agreement with each other.
And related to that, another viewer asks, should we treat our preferences as a guide or a stringent checklist, Dr. Aesha?
A guide. And the reason why, I don't like checklists. Checklists are for shopping. And you're not shopping for a person, right? I remember working with some clients where their checklist was pages and pages and pages. And often those preferences came as a result of their reactionary, like the aftermath of a breakup. So it's like, oh, well, he was short, and so I ain't dealing with short dudes anymore. So I'm putting, I'm only put, and it has nothing to do with why the relationship, didn't work. So sometimes those preferences aren't really clear. I would rather you date by values, make choices by your values, and your preferences are the things. Okay, these values are must have, and I prefer him to be tall and chocolatey and 250 pounds and like whatever those preferences are. But if I see the values show up in a man who doesn't have all of those things, I'm still attracted to him. Well, I'm open to dating him.
Can you give us an example of the values that you're speaking of? Because I think that some people, to your point, get values and preferences mixed up. So what do you define values to be?
Yes. So some of those values would be, I value personal growth, or I value spirituality. And as the way I live out my spirituality is I go to church, and I value someone who would want to have a family in that same way. Or I value, a certain type of financial freedom, right? I value a lifestyle that looks like this. Like those things tend to be core values. That we most of the time make decisions based off of our values, right? Like, where do I want to live? How do I want to live? Are those values? I value honesty and transparency and direct communication. And so, when you are looking to date, you want to date with those things in mind, because those are the things that break up a relationship anyway. It isn't, it isn't, his height that tends to be the final straw. Is usually a conflict over values.
That's a very good point. Now, we have been in this pandemic for the last, was it 6 months now? And so many of us have been and are still quarantining. But I often find, and just having conversations with various women, that a lot of us have really been quarantining, not just literally, but figuratively. Really working on ourselves, really spending time with ourselves. I think I mentioned in an earlier show that this time has really forced a lot of us to sit still and get clear on some things. So another viewer asks, after long periods of solitude, how do we know we're ready to date mentally, emotionally, physically, etc.?
That's a really good question, because I tell people all the time, just because you want a relationship doesn't mean you're ready for it, right? So wanting it doesn't mean, okay, I should have it. So readiness, you have to take a look at a couple of things, and there are skill sets to that. So I always say that the dating process is a spiritual and personal growth journey. because you have to start looking at vulnerability, for example, is a skill set that you need to develop. And how you relate to vulnerability shows up in how you do self-care. Because in order to take care of yourself, you got to be aware of your own needs. And often you got to ask for help, right? So you need to look at certain skill sets like vulnerability, like your ability to communicate your needs, and also listen to another person, right, when they're communicating, so that you're not making snap judgments about them. You also want to take a look at things like, am I ready to really share my life and my time? So, what does your life management look like? Like, how do you set up your week? So, a lot of people think that, oh, once I meet someone, I will make time for them. That's not how it works. You can't squeeze him into the margins of your calendar, right? So, are you willing now to look at? I've had to do this with both men and women. Let's look at your schedule. One gentleman, I was like, you giving too much time to the church, right? Like, way too much time to the church. And you're feeling resentful about that. And when is this lady going to show up that you're going to court and marry? Because you're giving all your time to the church. And so some things you're going to have to say yes to, and some things you're going to have to say no to. So this is how you know you're starting to be ready, as you're positioning your life, you're creating room for this person, you're starting to practice vulnerability, and you are ready to be resilient and persistent. Because you're going to meet someone, it's going to fizzle out, you're going to feel some kind of way. Are you going to quit? Right? Like, do you have that resilience? You have persistence. So those are all of the things that most people don't talk about. They tell you, do you know how to make your bed and balance your checkbook? Then you must be ready for a husband. And since they go beyond that,
You are
it
so
goes
right
way.
about that. You're so right about that. Now, Dr. Aesha, I could have this conversation with you all day long, literally, but I want to be
Mhm.
respectful of your time. So, as we wrap up, what final parting words of advice or encouragement do you have for Black women who may be watching this and are at their own relationship related crossroads?
Yes. Some of the things I want you to start to do is to have faith in yourself and faith in your future. I've been having to have this conversation with my clients, and I've asked them, where is your faith? And I don't mean, do you have faith? I mean, the direction of your faith. Because many of them are starting to feel a little frustrated, a little hopeless, a little bit like, is it going to happen for me, God? And I'm like, where the direction of your faith? Is it in what your pastor has taught you about relationships? Is it in the books and the memes? Or is it in your ability to create the future that you desire? Because if it is, then you need to keep your faith directed that way, right? So I want you all to, to constantly believe in yourself, to believe that, it's possible, to reach out for support when you need it, but to not give up hope, because hope is the confident expectation that something good is going to happen for you. And I believe that that's true for you.
Ooh, that's such a good word. Ooh, somebody pass the collection plate for Dr. Aisha now.
Right? I don't mean to have a little praise break
That's
on that
right.
one.
That's right. Now, speaking of support, how can people connect with you, Dr. Aisha?
Yeah, so you can find me online at my website, blacklovematchmaker.com. Also on Facebook, Black Love Matchmaker, or on Instagram at Dr. Aesha. You have to spell out Doctor, Doctor. Otherwise, it looks like Draesha. So Dr. Aesha on Instagram. And go ahead and slide in my DM to tell me you saw me on the Think Like a Thought Leader podcast, and we'll have a conversation about how I can support you.
Oh, amazing. Well, Dr. Aisha, as always, I really appreciate your expert insight, and you always cut right to the heart of things and you help it make sense for all of us. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me back. I love you and I love this community. So
And we love you
thank you again.
too. Now, if you enjoyed this conversation and it inspired you in some way, then please feel free to spread the word by sharing it with someone who you believe needs to see or hear it. And if you love today's show, you'll definitely want to sign up to be notified when I have other insightful conversations to help you build wealth related to your calling by texting me at 404-737-4957. That way, you'll never miss another discussion when it airs, and you'll also periodically receive communication tips to help you position your brand and business as a thought leader in your industry. And finally, in an effort to stay true to our vision and remain unbossed, and unapologetic, we've created the opportunity for those of you who enjoy this transformational content to support us monetarily through Patreon. So for as little as $5 a month, you can invest in a network dedicated to creating programming for the upliftment and enrichment of Black people through media and entrepreneurship. So to patronize us, please visit thinklikeathoughtleader.com and hit that green button that says, "Let's build this." Or if you're more comfortable doing a one-time contribution instead, you can go ahead and click that blue button, which allows you to give via PayPal. Your monthly or one-time investment will help build a groundbreaking multimedia company that will shift paradigms and empower a generation of leaders and entrepreneurs with thoughtful programming and high-quality content. So, to learn more about how you can donate and how you can patronize us, please visit thinklikeathoughtleader.com. And we thank you so much in advance for your support. That's all for us. Thanks for tuning in.